Okay, so now I'm not going to get big into Aristotle, but he was an ancient Greek, and part of the ancient Greeks' kind of whole society and religion required theater. They were required to attend plays, histories, or sorry, they didn't have histories. They had tragedies or comedies, and that's why the tradition in theater of having a mask that is happy and a mask that is sad. So you have like the comedy mask, and then you would have like the tragedy mask. That actually comes from Aristotle's time and before it and after it. And these plays were no joke. You would go, and there would be a series of plays, and you would go from sun up until sundown around the winter equinox or the vernal equinox. And so that means that you were going for 12 hours. And you weren't just sitting there. People were eating and talking and going and seeing people, but every citizen was required to go, and they encouraged slaves and women to go too, because you have to remember that as much as people talk about the Greeks inventing democracy, it was only for the men, specifically men who were landowners. Anyway, Aristotle had to go all of these plays, and the thing about the Greeks was their philosophy was tied into math. They didn't have separation like now. We say someone's a math guy, or somebody's a science guy, or somebody's an English guy, or an art guy, or girl, or whatever. But they didn't actually see things that way, and the Greeks believed that they could decipher the language of the spheres, and that math was the language of the gods. So on the one time, these are religious observances, they are also social observances, and you have to go. So Aristotle's trapped there, and he has to go. And he's like, start seeing a pattern. And a lot of Greek philosophers were absolutely fascinated with the idea that pretty much everything could be boiled down into a formula. So Aristotle starts these series of essays and notes in all of the plays that he's going to, comedies and comedies and tragedies. And he boils them down, and he comes up with what we still use today, this idea of plot as a graph that you could do. And there are many different plots now. We use all kinds of plot guidelines, and if you don't believe me, go watch a movie called Memento. It will blow your mind. But the thing is, Shakespeare, we know that Shakespeare studied. He was a classicist. He had a classical education that includes studying Greeks and Romans. And he studied these guys. He had to have, because everyone who was of his class who took that training knew of this stuff. And all Shakespearean plays, because he was pre our filmic days, they all follow the same thing. It doesn't matter if it's a comedy, a history, a romantic comedy, whatever. They all follow the same thing, and it centers around the main characters. Now, some of them, this is problematic for. I would argue that Romeo and Juliet is his most problematic play, because if you follow Romeo's arc, if he's the main character, then the climax is here. And if you follow Juliet's arc, then the climax is here. And it's not going to be perfect for every single one of your plays. It's going to be here and there. But generally speaking, round about the end of or the beginning of Act 4 is usually where your climax is going to be. It's still called the climax. And guided reading got that right. All right, but how you think about it, I'm going to run through it two different ways. I'm going to do it one way for tragedies, actually three ways. Tragedy, comedy, and kind of go through. So the basic things you need to know is that Aristotle was a Greek. He thought he could make a mathematical formula for the perfect play, and Shakespeare studied that, and that's why he structured his plays in the same triangle. It's called the Aristotelian triangle, okay? And ideally in a story, everything returns to the the way things were, the status quo. All right, so I'm going to pause this so you can answer a question, and then I'll do another one.